Hello, middle school artists. It's Mrs. Bierman here, and I'm here to introduce your at-home art project. So my in-school students, while I see you in school, will be working on 4 projects in the building. But you will also be responsible for this one at-home project that I expect you to work on while you're home. My full virtual students, this is just included in our projects for this semester. So we're going to be talking about perspective. Perspective is the way that you see things. When we think about perspective in drawing, it's ways that we can make an object look three-dimensional, or we can make objects look like they're further away. We're going to be using 1-point perspective, and as you get older, you'll find that there is also a 2-point perspective, but we're going to start pretty simply. So for today's part 1, you're going to need a piece of paper. So in your packet, or you may have gotten this from school, I'm going to just go ahead and use one of my 9x12 pieces of white drawing paper. So it's a little bit heavier. We are going to put some watercolor paints on this, maybe, or you can also use colored pencils. Even oil pastels or chalk pastels will work. You can use what you'd like, but a heavier paper, not computer paper, is better. You'll also need a pencil and some sort of circle tracer. Now I happen to have a good large one here, but maybe you can just use a plate or anything circular, but just make sure it's about the size of your paper. You don't want it to be too tiny. Mine even hangs off the edges a little, which is totally fine. In fact, I might pause it and you'll find one that's just a smidge smaller. Okay, so I did find one that's a little bit smaller, so look how much of my paper I take up. So I don't want it any smaller than this. I have like maybe a finger's width here on each side, but I don't want anything smaller than that. So do go find a circle tracer, your piece of paper, and a pencil. And if you need to pause it in the meantime, go ahead and do that now. I'm going to keep going. And what your first step is going to be is to trace that circle directly in the middle of your paper. You will also need a ruler or a straight edge for this. So if you're still hunting for supplies, you will need a straight edge. I forgot about that. So I have my circle traced on here. Hopefully you can see it okay. And once I have that traced, I want to find the center. And it doesn't have to be perfect by any means, but just eyeball it and just give yourself a small dot that only you can see right in the middle of your paper. So at this point, I want to show you what a finished drawing looks like. This is without color, but our finished drawing is going to be a view from the sidewalk of a city looking up. So all of these buildings that you see are coming to a point. All of their lines converge here at the center point. So what you're going to do is you're going to be creating different size buildings throughout your circle. And I'm going to show you how to do that next. Okay. So once you have that circle traced and you have that center dot in the middle, what you're going to do is you're going to take your ruler and you're going to make sure it's always touching that center point. And I'm going to then, I'm actually going to use the very tip of my ruler. I'm going to bring my first line up to 2. And then I'm going to rotate my paper. So you're going to rotate about as far as you want the thickness of your building to be. So I'm going to rotate it there. You could make it thicker, you can make it thinner or more narrow. I'm going to rotate it about that far, and I'm going to go up to 2 again. So these 2 lines are both going towards the center. They're going towards the center in the same direction, and they end at the same level. Okay? I'm going to skip a little bit of space, and I'm going to do it again. And maybe this time I will come up to 1. I'm going to rotate it again. This time my building is going to be more narrow. So I'm going to rotate it just to there. And again, I'm making sure those 2 lines go up to the same height. Okay? You're going to keep doing that until you have probably 6 or 7 buildings. We can always add more. We can always add more, but don't go crazy. This time I'm going to my 1.5 mark. So I want my buildings to all be slightly different. So some are thick, some are thin, some are taller, some are shorter. But you go ahead and just continue with these lines. And I'm going to stay right here. You probably don't need to watch this, but you certainly can. I'm going to keep on going here. I'm going to make another short one. So for me, this is building 5, and I'm going to do one more for building 6. Always keeping my ruler touching that center point. All right. So when I'm done with that, I have a series of diagonal lines on my paper. Okay. And now we are ready to go ahead and close those lines off. So pause this if you need to and finish your buildings, your diagonal lines, and we'll be back in a second to close off the buildings. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do, hopefully all of your lines are at the same height. I'm noticing I am going to fix one of mine. I want to look at it straight on this way. So you want it right in front of you. And when I do my line, you can probably freehand it. They're not super far away from each other, but if you want to be perfect, you can use your straight edge to create that perfectly horizontal line across there. So I'm going to do that with all of my buildings. I'm going to add that straight line across. I'll leave it up to you if you want to use a straight edge. Try not to go over your lines or overextend your lines. So go ahead and close off those buildings. Again, you should have at this point, you should have about 6 or 7 buildings total. Now this one I'm noticing, this was thicker. It was harder for me to draw a perfectly straight line. So I am just fixing that up a little bit. The wider they are, the more likely it is that you'll need a flat edge or a straight edge. Okay, so I've closed all those buildings off. Now I want to make them look three-dimensional so that they have some dimension to them. They have more than one face or more than one side. So I just want to figure out which way I want my buildings to go. So I'm going to add a little short line that goes off to the side. On this one, I'm going to go the opposite way on this building. It really doesn't matter which way you go. That's totally up to you. But you're just adding a very small diagonal line from one of the edges of each of your buildings. Now, if you make it a longer diagonal, it's going to be a wider building. Okay, so figure out how you want to do that. Okay, and once you have those, what you're going to do is you're going to again line up that ruler with that center point as well as the edge of your diagonal line, and you're going to close those buildings off. It is very, very important to make sure your ruler is touching that center point as it comes down. Okay, so don't just eyeball it. Make sure you put that ruler up towards the center point. Okay, and I'm going to do that to all 6 of my buildings. Make sure I have that center point, and then I'm going to close off my building. So I hope that you can see now that these buildings are looking three-dimensional because there is another face or another side to these buildings. Okay, so let me just get this one done. All right, all of my buildings have been closed off. At this point, I want you to just look around and see if you want to add another building in there. And if you do, if you seem to have space, like I have like this big fat building here, I can easily add another one behind it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to bring another building up behind it. And then I'm going to add my, oops, I need a second line there. Silly. I'm going to add my second line down to the base of my circle, close that off, add my diagonal, add my line in perspective there. So now I have one building overlapping another building. Okay, let's see, I have a little bit of space here, so I'm going to include another building here, and I'm going to bring the other side of my building behind my first one a little bit, close that off, and then add a small diagonal, whoops, make sure I touch that center point and bring the side of my building down. Okay, now I'm noticing this one looks a little funky because these two lines are like in exactly the same spot. But once I add some of my Sharpie, it will all fix itself. So before we start Sharpieing anything, at this point I do want you to take at least 5 of your buildings, and add some sort of top to them. So you can do a stacked building like the Empire State Building here with different levels at the top. You could add an antenna or a steeple. You could add some sort of tower on the top. But do pick about 5 buildings, 4 or 5. Please try to pick 5. 5 buildings and add some sort of interesting design on your buildings. So if you are going to add like a tower on the top, again, you want to make sure it is following the same angle as what you already have there. So my tower, when I made my tower, I made sure it pointed up towards the top. And then I can add my little tower here. Maybe I just want to do something like that. And again, I could add more dimension by adding the side to that top of my building. So that's a stacked building. You can do multiple stacks. I don't have any really super thick buildings, but I'm gonna just like sketch it out. Like I know I want this stacked, but I need to make sure my lines are following that angle. So when I do this, I do want to make sure, even if I sketch it out really lightly, like I just did, when I go over my lines with a dark pencil, I want to make sure I'm following the correct angle. So when you do that, please use your ruler for me. It's very, very important. Okay. So go ahead and add a top to all of those buildings, and I will be back for part 2.